I'm Tatyana and I'm going to show you how to use PEmbroider to code and embroider this pattern of generated faces. The first thing I'm going to do is run you through the PEmbroider template file. On line 1, we import the PEmbroider library into processing. On line 3, we are declaring the variable e, which is a PEmbroider graphic. This is going to be the variable that stores all of our embroidery information. Line 4, public void setup, is our setup function. The setup function runs once when we run our sketch with the little arrow at the top. If I do that right now, not much is going to happen since this is just the template file. Right now my size is set to 200 by 200 on line 5. And this is a 200 by 200 pixel, but because of the millimeter to pixel ratio, this is a 2 by 2 centimeter square. Line 6 says no loop, and this means that the code just runs once. After line 8, we have our file setup info. So line 9, e equals new PEmbroider graphics, is us initializing the PEmbroider graphic e that we declared on line 3, and the variable width and height copy the width and height from the canvas so that our embroidery is the same size as the graphic we are previewing when we hit run. On line 10, we have string output file path equals sketch path filename.vp3. This is where we're setting the file name for our exported file. You can just go in there and change it to the file extension for your specific machine. If you need a Jeff file, you just type in Jeff. I'm going to leave it at VP3 since that's the machine that I'm using. And line 11e sets a path to the string that we just declared. Line 13 is where we start our drawing. e.beginDraw starts the drawing, and e.clear makes it so the drawing's empty in case there's anything there from a previous run. Line 17 is the section where we put our code, and we'll come back to here in a second. Line 20 is file saving and previewing. This has 4 functions, all but one of which are commented out right now. Line 23, e.visualize. e.visualize previews these stitches that the machine will run. Since we have nothing right now, our file was empty when we ran it, but once we have stitches, this will allow us to see it. e.enddraw is what writes out the file, so this will save the file name.vp3. So this is what saves the file name.vp3. Since we're still iterating, we don't need this line of code to run, and we can wait until we're happy with our design before we uncomment it. And e.optimize optimizes the stitches so that it takes the least amount of time. If you have a bigger file, this can be a little bit of a slow function, so we're also leaving this commented out as we don't need it for the iteration process. Line 25, we have save filename.png. This saves a little screenshot of the file. You don't need to do this, I like to do it because then I can see what my VP3 looks like without an embroidery previewer. Now that I've walked you through the template, I'm going to save this as generative faces. And then I'm going to get started in the Your Code Here section. So here I've made a sketch of the faces that I want. It's going to be a 3x3 grid of this kind of face, which is just a green ellipse of a different width and height, blue eyes with pupils looking in the same direction, and a mouth of a random slant. The way we do this is we type in e.ellipse with the center x, center y, height, and width. I'm going to put it into the middle of my canvas, so I'm going to do 100, 100, 50, 60. If we run this, we can see a small circle in the middle of the screen. I'm going to want my faces bigger since this is a 2 by 2 centimeter and I'm trying to fit 9 faces in a 3 by 3 grid. I'm actually going to go into my size and I'm going to change it to 700 by 700. Now when I run it, I'm going to have a lot more area to work on. Right now our circle is running with default stroke and fill settings, which is no fill and a stroke of 1. I'm going to go in and I'm going to type e.stroke weight 5. Now when I run this, we can see that the stroke on the circle is a lot thicker. Now that the stroke weight is thicker, we can see a little more about the pattern. When it was just one thickness, it was just a line going in a circle, but now we can see that the type of line is perpendicular. That means it's doing a lot of stitches perpendicular to the shape of the circle within the width of 5. So if I go in before I draw my circle, I'm going to just want to type in e.stroke mode. I'm going to change that to e.tangent. This will make it so that all of the lines are instead tangential to the circle. I'm also going to go into my visualize function and I'm going to comment false which will make it so that I don't see the needle downs. The needle down point is where the needle goes into the cloth. I'm also going to turn off the last variable, which shows us the connecting stitches. So now all I see is my black circle with no information on the different stitches. Since I want my faces to be green, I'm going to go in and I'm going to type in e.stroke. And this takes an RGB value. So I'm going to go 0 for red, 150 for my green, and 0 for my blue value. Now when I run it, it should be green, and you can see here that it is. Now that I have a basic circle running, I'm going to go in and I'm going to add a for loop to make a 3x3 grid. I'm going to need a variable for my number of columns, which is going to be num calls. That's going to be equal to 3, and my number of rows will also be equal to 3. Now that I have this, I'm going to make a for loop for int call equals 0. Call is less than num call. And we're going to increase call by 1 each time. Now I'm going to take my ellipse and I'm going to put it into here. Now that I've moved ellipse in here, this will just be drawing the same circle 3 times since we haven't edited the code to use the call value. So I'm going to go, and since column dictates the x value, I'm going to add 150 times call. That will space them 150 pixels from each other based on the column that it's in. So if you see this, my faces are a little too small to fit the canvas, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to make a variable for the ellipse height and the ellipse width. And instead of 50, 60, I'm going to input these numbers. Now when I run, I'll have bigger circles, but they aren't spaced enough. So I'm going to times the column by 200 instead. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to add another for loop for my rows. And then I can add 200 times row to my Y value so that it offsets that as well. And now when I run, we're going to have an off-center grid. So now it's time to center that. I'm going to find the center of the circle for each column. So for each column, the X is going to be the same. I'm going to make a variable CX for center X. And I'm going to set it to column times ellipse width plus 50. Column times the ellipse width plus 50, so that each circle is 50 apart. And then I'm going to add 150, which is going to be the offset from the left side of the canvas. Now I'm going to make another variable, which will be CY, which will be the center Y. And that's going to be based off of the row. And instead of ellipse width here, we're going to do ellipse height. We're going to add 50, and then we're going to add 150, because that's the offset from the top of the canvas. So now that I have the center X and center Y for each ellipse, I'm going to plug that into my ellipse function, and it's going to be ellipse CX, comma CY, ellipse width, ellipse height. Now when I run it, we have a centered grid of circles. Since I want all the circles to vary a little bit, I'm going to add some more variables for the width and the height of the faces. I'm going to do that with a float so that I can use the random function a bit easier. I'm going to do current height equals ellipse height times random. I'm going to try 0.8, comma 1.3, which means the ellipse height will be between 80% and 130% of 150. I'm also going to add one for current width, current W, which will be ellipse random 0.8, 1.3. And this is going to be different for every single circle. So I can plug this in here. Now when I run, they're all a little different. So now I have my head shapes. And I'm going to just write a little comment so that I know where that is. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do the eyes. So for the eyes, if you look at my sketch, we already have the circles. I'm going to want 2 larger circles equidistant from the center, and then I'm going to want 2 smaller circles that are offset from the center of those circles, which are the pupils. Because of the way that PEmbroider deals with colors, I'm going to be making a new loop. This makes it so that the machine will embroider all of my green shapes first, then all of my blue shapes, then all of my red shapes, instead of embroidering each face one by one. This way I'm only going to have to change the thread color twice instead of 26 times. But since we do already have our loop, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy it. We have the same number of columns and rows, so I'm going to leave that the same. But I'm going to make a new variable for my eye diameter. I'm going to set the diameter to 25. I'm going to get rid of the e.ellipse function. I'm going to write e.circle cx cy eye diameter. When I run this, we're going to have smaller circles in the center of all of our ellipses from earlier. So everything is green. First thing I'm going to want to do is go back before I run the eyes, and I'm going to want to change the stroke color to no red, no green, and blue. I'm also going to need 2 eyes per face, so I'm going to need a variable for my eye distance. I'm going to put this right above e.circle because I want the eye width to be different for each of the faces. I'm going to make a float called eye distance, which is going to be random between 40 and 100. Now that I have that, I'm going to make a different circle. But I'm going to add half the eye distance to one of them, and I'm going to subtract half the eye distance from the other. Now when I run it, we'll have 2 eyes per face of each different lengths apart. I'm also going to go ahead and I'm going to make a different variable for each x and y for both of my eyes. I'm going to make float I1x, float I1y, and I'm going to do the same thing for my second eye. Since we already have the x values, I'm going to copy and paste them. Right now, the y's are the same as the center y. I'm going to put that in there, and then I actually want to raise the eyes from the middle, so I'm going to subtract 10 from I1y and make I2y equal to I1y. Now when I run this, we can see that they're above the center of the face. Right now we have the eye diameter the same for each eye. Since we set eye diameter up before our loop, I'm going to copy and paste that into our loop. I'm going to change it to a float, and I'm going to add a random function. Now we have smaller and larger eyes on each face. I'm also going to change the stroke weight so that they're not as thick as the face. I'm going to go in and change stroke weight to 3. So here we're drawing the eyes. And now we're going to want to draw the pupils. I'm going to add 3 different variables, one for pupil diameter, one for the X offset, and one for the Y offset. Pupil diameter is going to be based off of the eye diameter, and it's going to be multiplied by random. Since I always want the pupil diameter to be smaller than the eye, I'm going to set that to 0.3, 0.8, which will be between 30 and 80% as large as the eye. I'm going to set my X offset and Y offset to 0 so that I can preview what I have so far. To do this, I'm going to copy my circles from before and replace eye diameter with pupil diameter. Add my X offset to both eyes and add my Y offset to both eyes as well. Now when I run this, they should be in the center of the eyes, but they should be smaller than the eyes. Since they're in the center, all of the faces are looking forward. I'm going to go in and change the X and Y offset so that they can look in all different directions. I'm going to change the X offset first, and I'm going to change that to eye diameter minus pupil diameter. And I'm going to divide that by 2. I'm going to divide that by 2 so that the pupil is always fully contained in the eyeball. If I run this, we can see that the eyes are looking all the way to the right. Since I don't want it to be looking all the way to the right all the time, I'm going to add the random function, and I'm going to put -1, +1, so that it can look anywhere from all the way to the left to all the way to the right. And now we have some looking in the center, some looking to the right, some looking to the left. If I copy this into my Y offset, it will be doing the same thing, but up and down instead of left and right. Now that we've added that, we can see that the pupils are all looking in different directions, but all the eyes per face look in the same direction. So now that we've done our eyes, and let me clean up my code. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a section for drawing the mouth. The mouth is going to be similar to the eyes since we're going to need 2 points, but instead of drawing circles at each of those points, we are going to be making a line connecting them. The first thing I'm going to want to do for mouth is set the stroke to red. I'm going to do 150, 0, 0. Again, I'm going to want to copy my for loop so that it draws all of the red shapes at the same time. I'm going to get rid of, and I'm going to have my information for my center X and my center Y of each of the circles. So if we look here, we have 2 points and they're connected. This will be 0.1 and this will be 0.2. So I'm going to need 4 variables. I'm going to start off with 4 variables, which will be float mouth, 1Y, mouth, 1X. I'm going to need 4 variables for this. I'm going to need float mouth, 1X, mouth, 1Y, mouth, 2X, and mouth, 2Y. I'm also going to need the width of the mouth. So I'm going to go float mouth width, and I'm going to set it to 40 for right now. Mouth 1X is going to be the center X minus mouth width over 2, and mouth 2X is going to be center X plus mouth width over 2. We're going to set mouth 1y to center y. We're also going to set mouth 2y to center y. And add our semicolons. Now that we have our 4 points, we are going to make a line. To do that, I'm going to type in e.line, mouth 1x, mouth 1y, mouth 2x, mouth 2y. Now when I run, we should have a straight line in the middle of the face. I'm going to want to move the mouth lower just like we moved the eyes higher. To do that, I'm going to make a new variable for my mouth center y. That's going to be based off of the center y, but I'm going to add a random between 10 and 50. Now I'm going to change my center y to mouth center y. And they're all going to be different values lower. I also want the mouths to be at a slant, so I am going to add a random function to each of these, adding a random -10, +10 to both mouth 1y and mouth 2y. When I run this, we can see that now the faces are slanted. Now that the mouths are all slanted and on the lower half of the face, I'm going to add a new variable which is going to change the weight of the stroke. So this will change the stroke of the mouth. So if you look up on eyes, our eyes was stroke weight 3 and our head was a stroke weight of 5. You can see the eyes are less thick than the face. I want the mouth to be at least as thick as the face, but I also want it to be different per face. So I'm going to go in back to my mouth. I'm going to make a variable for mouth weight, and it's going to be a random between 5 and let's say 14. Now that I have that variable, I'm going to add a stroke weight of mouth weight. And now when I run it, we should have mouths of varying thicknesses. I'm also going to change the stroke mode to e.perpendicular so that we have some different textures on our lines. I'm also going to add a new function called stroke spacing. Stroke spacing changes the distance between each of the strokes. So now if we change it super close, it's a lot more filled, but this density would cause issues embroidering. And if we make it too sparse, it looks a little funky. I'm going to change it to 4, so it's going to show up a little bit jaggedy. It's going to turn up a little jaggedy once I embroider my file. We can run it to make sure that there's no errors. Now that we have our iteration complete and we're done with our code, we can go and we can comment out, optimize, and draw and save file. Now if I run this, I can have my folder open. When I run this, so it exported as filename.png and filename.vp3 because I never edited the names from the template. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to change that to generative faces, and I'm going to go back up to my vp3 file name and paste that into there as well. I'm also going to go in and change the 2 values on visualize back to true so that I can see my needle downs and my connecting threads. I can delete these. Now I can use my PNG to preview my file. This is the one that I just ran. Once you're happy with your faces, you can plug in your USB drive and drag them on. I'm going to be embroidering this file, which I generated earlier, and now we're going to move over to setting up the embroidery machine from sewing mode into embroidery mode and embroidering our file. Now that we've made the embroidery file, I'm going to show you how to change the embroidery machine from sewing mode into embroidery mode. The first thing we're going to want to do is remove the presser foot for sewing and switch in the embroidery presser foot. To do this, we unscrew the attachment using the screw on the left side. Once that's out, we can pop the embroidery presser foot into place. The embroidery presser foot looks like this. It fits into the same spot, but it's a little trickier, so you might need to reposition the needle while you're doing this. I've lowered the needle with the hand wheel so that the needle screw does not get in the way. The second thing we're going to do is pull out the sewing base and place the embroidery base into position. It should snap into place once it's fully secure. Now we're going to input our USB drive and we're going to open the machine and turn it on. Once it's on, it's going to tell us to remove the hoop and attach the embroidery presser foot. Once you press OK, the machine will calibrate its position. Now I'm going to add in my threads. Place the spool into the machine and follow the arrows guiding the thread. Once you're at the needle, you can use the automatic threader to help guide the thread through the eye of the needle, and then use your fingers to pull it all the way through. Once that's in place, we're going to pop out the bobbin cover and place the bobbin in. The bobbin should be wound counterclockwise. Then we're going to have the thread follow the arrows. There's a tiny blade at the end which will cut the thread for you. Now we're going to place the bobbin cover back in and it will snap on. To get the hoop ready, you can loosen it by turning the screw on the side and pulling out the center. Now we're going to place our two pieces of fabric. The bottom piece is the fabric lining and the top piece is the muslin. Then we're going to snap the center of the hoop back into place and we're going to tighten the screw. It should be snug, and you can pull the sides of your fabric so that it's taut and doesn't have any wrinkles. Now we're going to choose our file. Once you press OK, it'll show you a preview. It'll show you a preview of your file, and you can position it using the arrows. You can use the arrows to move your design around on the canvas, and when you press the arrows, you can see that the hoop is moving. If your file size is different than the hoop you have, you'll get an error. To change this, go to the hoop options and select the size of the hoop currently on your machine. This is how it would look for a 240 by 150 hoop. You can press the corner check button to see the outer bounds of your file and see where it will land on the fabric. It loops through each corner and then goes to the center. Now back to our smaller hoop. Lower the presser foot and press start to begin. It's going to start sewing and then it's going to stop, asking you to cut the thread. Press OK and snip the thread and pull out the excess. Now you can press start and it will go all the way through on your first color. If you look at the screen, you can see that under the hoop size, it will tell us how many stitches our design has left in total, which spool we are on out of the total different number of colors we're using, and the amount of stitches out of the total for that given color. It also gives us a preview, and now we can see it finishing up. Once you are done stitching, it will stop and tell you the new color you need to change to. I'm going to take out my green spool and replace it with blue. I'm going to take out my hoop. I'm going to replace the green bobbin with a blue bobbin. Now I'm going to put the hoop back into place, and I'm going to once again lower my presser foot. I'm going to press start and it's going to do the first few stitches, ask me to cut my thread again, and then I'm going to click start and it will continue. Now it's doing all the eyes. Once it's done sewing all the eyes, it's going to stop and it's going to move to the position of the first stitch for our next color. The screen will now tell us to change the thread color. I'm going to put my red bobbin in. I'm going to take out my blue spool and replace it with a red spool. Then I'm going to put my hoop back in, lower my presser foot, press start, cut the thread, and I'm going to watch my design finish. Once it's done, the screen will tell you the embroidery is finished. We can now take out the embroidery hoop and remove our design. To do that, we're going to loosen the screw, pop out the center, and remove it from the frame. We can see we have a lot of threads, and I'm going to cut those out with scissors. Once I cut them all off, I can brush away the extra fibers and iron down my design if I want. This is the final design. Now we're done and have our finished product.